Guys, what's going on? Welcome to today's video. I want to talk to you about construction financing. Construction financing makes about 30% of my income, and I've learned how to do it quite well over the past 10 years. And I can tell you, if you're a loan originator and you're not offering construction financing, then you're missing out on a lot, because I work with a ton of builders and even referral partners who actually have construction deals and they don't know what to do with them, and they bring them in. It's a business loan, so you could actually write another company into your term sheet, and both companies could be compensated and paid directly through closing. Makes it amazing. All right, so if you don't know who I am, my name is Zevi Mortgage Academy. I'm an owner of a mortgage company in Los Angeles, and I'm doing these videos because hopefully they help you out. Hopefully they help you make more money. That is the point. All right, and at any time, if you enjoy my videos, I would really appreciate if you give it a thumbs up, if you subscribe to my channel. In addition to all this, if you want to learn more about it, there is an academy that I put together. The link is in the description below. With that, let's get started. Let's talk about construction financing. What do you need to know? Now, here's the deal. With construction financing, there's a couple ways to structure them. Just like any loan, right? You can go institutional, which is bank money, or you can go private. Now, where the rates are today, it's kind of easier to go through the private channel. There's more flexibility, and I'm going to touch on that in a minute. But what I want to talk to you about is what happens when a borrower approaches you and asks you for money. The first thing that you typically tend to hear is the amount of money that they need to build out the property, no matter what it is, right? So as an example, if somebody came to us today and said, hey, Zevi, I wanted $500,000 to build something, all right? So I'm just gonna say 500,000 to build something. That's the number that they have in their head. Now, there's a couple ways that we can gauge this number to know if it's accurate or not. And what do I mean by that? Check this out. If somebody is trying to build something, there is typically a price per square foot. Now, I'm in Los Angeles in California. Typically, the price per square foot out here runs between $300 to $400 per square foot. So if somebody's telling me, hey, Zevi, I'm trying to build something that, as an example, is 3,000 square feet, and I know, that's about $300 a square foot, they're probably gonna hover around $900 to $1 million just for the build out, right? And they're talking to me about 500,000 for that, I'm just gonna say 3,000 square feet. That's gonna be a challenge, that's a problem. So the next conversation I'm gonna have with them is, how'd you come up with that number? Which leads us to number one, which is the budget, okay? What you wanna do is request a budget, and the budget is gonna outline the line items, meaning it's going to go through the whole construction, starting with, as an example, demolition, compaction, foundation, framing, plumbing, electrical, and you're going to start seeing the numbers of this person, whatever they're using, whatever they were quoted by either themselves as a builder or a general contractor. Okay, and so with the budget, what you want to do is you want to line it up to the drawings, because the drawings would actually tell you or show you what they're trying to build. And in addition to it, you're going to have the information to know the type of square feet that this budget is going to be allocated to. Once you have a visual and it seems logical, then the next thing you want to condition for is you want to know who the parties are, right? So how do you do that? Well, same way you would on any other transaction. You would just either have something called a PFS, which is a personal financial statement, or a 1003, which is a mortgage application. What will that give you? If you're not a loan originator already, the mortgage application is known as a 1003. And it basically outlines who this person is, where they live, where they work, how much money they make, how much liquid reserves they have, meaning savings, allocated toward, again, we're gonna need a down payment still, unless they bought this place in cash, which we're gonna talk about in a minute. And then, do they have a schedule of real estate? You know, have they done this before? Meaning, are they building this themselves, or do we need a resume of a builder, right? Whoever's building it, imagine this. Imagine you were going to cut a check today because I wanted to build something and I came to you for money. You would want to know if I've done this before or is this the first time I'm trying to put something like this together. It's going to matter. So we want to know about this individual. Now, the other thing that is really important to know, a lot of these projects are typically done in corporations or holding companies, which are referred to as limited liability companies, LLCs, right? So what you want to do is you want to find out if this person that you're talking to is the sole member of the LLC or are there other parties to this, right? And they might say, hey, yeah, there's two other parties, great. So what's the percentages of these parties? You know, this guy might be 25%, this person might be 50, maybe another 25. At the end of the day, we're just trying to hit 100%. Okay? And we're going to need applications on all these people to figure out who they are. Same story as we've discussed before on the 1003. Once we have this information, it's a little bit easier for us to make a more informed decision about whether this is a deal that we can move forward with. And if it is, then I want to start talking about the actual structure of the construction loan, right? Because initially, remember that person came to us for a budget of $500,000. That would be the first thing. Then there is actually a contingency of 10%, all right? So in this case, it would be $50,000. And why? Because although this person's fairly confident in their budget, construction always seems to have unforeseens. We want to make sure that we account for the unforeseen. All right, so that's your contingency. Now, as we continue to move forward, remember, when you're in a construction loan, typically, the interest is paid through the construction loan. So you don't necessarily have to write a check in most cases. All right, again, you could structure it differently, but in most cases, the interest is built in to the construction loan. Now, if this just, and as an example, is a 10% type of a situation, and I know that 10% of $500,000 is $50,000, then this would be the interest that would be built in for 12 months, okay? This is the contingency, all right? And this is the budget. So now we have what they wanted, we have the contingency, we have the interest reserve, the money that's gonna get paid every month, right? We also have to talk about the fees. So if this money is an example coming from an investor or a debt fund, there's a very good chance that the debt fund is gonna want at least 2%, all right? So that would be about $10,000, all right? Now there may be some processing fees in here. I'm not gonna get into that just yet, and I'm just gonna call it the fund. Then you as the broker, realistically, are probably gonna ask for 2% as well. So that's $10,000, that's your commission. All right, so my point is, you see how this 500,000 is not exactly the number that we're gonna be looking at. We're gonna continue. This is the 2%. Then you have escrow and title, which tend to be anywhere between 3/4 to 1% of this amount right here, all right? So that's, say, another $5,000 for escrow and title, all right? Something else that I want to touch on, which I guess I should have done more towards the top, is depending on whether or not they've already have, it's called RTI, basically ready to get started. Okay, shovel ready. They've already went through the process of entitlements. Now, if they haven't, then typically what I find, and I'm gonna actually put it up here for you, is that entitlements are about 5%. All right, so this is 5% is entitlements. All right, so basically, let me give you a little more information about that. When somebody finds a piece of land and they want to build this house with the drawings that they gave us, they have to pay for the architect to draw it. They have to pay for the structural engineer to tell them, you know, what kind of steel and reinforcements they need to be able to put this shell together. They have to pay for the permits, they have to pay for the surveyor. So there's a lot of other fees that are involved, and that's where this 5% is. And then the escrow and the title, and then sometimes, or there is a fund control. Well, I wouldn't say sometimes, I mean it's always. And the fund control is the person who's going to be dispersing the funds. Now, the reason I said sometimes is because if you work through a bank, the bank might do it themselves. If you're working through a fund, they might allocate that to a third party. And if they do, then there's typically a 1% fee for that, which is $5,000, right? And this is fund control. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there for a second. I'm gonna stop right here, and I'm just gonna tally this up for us. I'm gonna use my calculator. And the reason that I'm doing this is I want you to understand that the person came to us for $500,000, right? And then all of a sudden we have all these other fees. We wanna make sure that we size up the deal correctly. All right, so here we go. So we have 525,000 off the top, right? We have another 50 as a contingency. We have another 50 for interest reserve. We have another 2% for the fund as a commission. We have another 2% for the broker. There's gonna be some processing fees as well, but I'm not gonna count to those right now. And then there's going to be 1% to escrow and title, 1% to fund control. So interestingly enough, that 500,000 deal that they were inquiring about is actually $655,000. All right, interesting, right? We just went from 500 to 655, which really encompass the whole deal. All right, so that's a snapshot. We're not done there. Now I want to talk about what it looks like in terms of leverage. All right, so let's do that. I just, hopefully you got all this information. If you have any questions, by the way, I know it's kind of a lot to cover, just drop it in the comments below, and then we'll go through that. So 655, let's remember that number real quick. So we need 655,000 to be able to put this together. Now we have to ask ourselves a question. Typically, if we're going to go the private route, or are we going to go the institutional route? And this would be a bank, and this would be a private investor, or a debt fund, meaning that there's a group of investors, kind of like a pool, that are controlled by one fund manager or a group of fund managers, and they basically look at the deals and they lend money from the pool. That's basically the difference. So typically on this end right here, what you're going to find is that this, by the way, this right here is your cost. All right, this is your cost. But the thing is about this cost is that we left out one thing, which is the property, the land. And if somebody just bought a piece of property for 100,000 as an example, and they come back to you and they say, I got a steal, it's worth 300. Can I get credit for the difference? The answer is no, not even for a few years after they bought it. The investor is always going to go back to the actual amount that they purchased the property, unless they got it like 10, 15 years ago and you can substantiate that it is in fact worth a lot more money today. And the reason is because the investor always wants you to be in the deal. They don't want to cash you out of the deal. Even if you bought something at a discount, they still want you to be in the deal. All right, so you have two paths here. And the question now is, and I'm going to play this hypothetical. Say the budget is $655, that's our cost. And let's just say that the land is $100,000, right? This is the land, this is the cost. This is on the private investor side. And you could do the same on the bank side. I'm just going to say 655 and 100. Okay, land and cost. So basically our project this is the project. It's $755,000. This is our project. This is important to understand because when I look at a project, I imagine that somebody gave me a box that almost looks like a present with a bow on it. I want to know everything that is in that box. That is my final number. And in this case, it's 755, whether I go private or whether I go institutional. Remember that for a minute. We're going to start with 755 from the top, because what's coming next is the loan to the cost. All right. So if we know that 755 is what we call LTC, loan to cost, then on the bank side, you can go anywhere between 60 to 70% of this number. All right, and then on the private side, you can typically go anywhere between 65 to 85% of this number. So when you're talking about leverage, if you're able to leverage your deal 60 to 70% on the bank side, which means you have to put down 30% down, or here 65 to 85%, you could put down as little as 15 or 20% down, is a substantial difference. Now, the one thing that I want to point out to you is that this is your cost including the cost of the land, right? It was 655 cost of construction plus 100,000 cost of the land, so you're at 755. When you're looking at the leverage, and what I'm going to do here, I'm going to use 75% as the loan to cost, and over here what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 65% as the loan to cost. So I'm going to use my calculator real quick. And let's assume for a second 755 times 0.75, okay? So I can get a loan here, 75% of this number, right? I can get a loan here of 566,250. On this side, I'm using 65%, 755 times 0.65, I can get a loan of 490,750. So I would have to put more of a down payment here than I would over here. Now there is one question that remains. If you can get this as a loan, okay, and this as a loan, this means that the difference between this number and this number is your down payment. The difference between this number and this number is your down payment, right? Now, what I want to say is, if in fact the land is paid off, then you could actually give credit to yourself for the land. So let's take a look at that real quick. We have 755 minus 490, okay, and this would be the down payment that I need to put down. 755 minus 490. Here I would need to put up $265,000. This would be my down payment. On this side, 755 minus 566, this would be my loan amount, right? So 755 minus 566, I would have to put down $189,000. Again, my down payment. However, on both sides, if I was able to say that from that 755, which included 655 for the construction plus 100,000 for the land, if I initially paid this land in cash and I came into the transaction with equity, then I can actually remove the 100,000 from here for the land, remove the 100,000 from here for the land, and here I would have to bring in 89,000, and here I would need to bring 165,000. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of how these things would play out. You're going to get more leverage from a private investor or debt fund than you would from the bank. There is one advantage, and this is huge, you should make note of it, is the fact that typically when you work with a bank, it's called Dutch versus non-Dutch interest. The bank gives money as work is being done, right? And then for that, you typically only pay on the amount of money that is given to you. However, when you're dealing with a private investor, the private investor typically writes a check for the total amount of the money and then gives it to a third party. They just want to get a return on their money. So day one, you actually pay interest on the full 655, which was the cost, and if it wasn't the land, it may be more than that. And the reason is because they don't want to be a part of the transaction. They literally just write a check, they give it to the fund control. The job of the fund control is to disperse the funds. But one positive thing about this is you might have different funds that tell you, hey, we will actually do this loan like a bank, and you only have to pay on the amount of money that you take. What I found is sometimes that could be a challenge simply because they're constantly lending. And I've found funds that have actually needed to disperse and the funds were not readily available. So that's pretty crazy. You would think that, I struck a deal, I saw my loan docs, everything is in order. Yeah, but they're still lending. So the fact that you pay on interest day one, you might think that's ludicrous. I would much rather just get the money and pay on it, once I draw. But if you're dealing with a private investor, the funds may or may not be there if they're not locked up with a fund control. So just something to keep in mind, all right? I gave you guys a ton of information about how this works. If you have any questions about it, please drop it in the comments. If you enjoy the video, I would really appreciate if you give it a thumbs up so other people like yourself on the web that are looking for this type of information can find it. And if you like my videos, then please subscribe to my channel. Otherwise, I thank you so much for watching this. If you're interested in learning how to put something like this together and you're still not 100% clear, you could do a couple things. One, you could drop me a comment. Number two, you could take advantage of the part-time Commercial Lender Academy, which is available to you via link in the description below. It would actually give you the framework of once you have a transaction and you're able to put it together, you actually have to draft up something called an LOI, letter of interest, letter of intent. All that is available for you there. It would walk you through the steps of being able to do it, A through Z. All right, so hopefully that helps. Again, any questions, drop them in the comments. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you watching this, and I'll catch you again on the next video. Take care.